Suffering is a very precarious, pervasive state that the jiva or the jiva bhoot, the embodied soul, often surrounds itself in a living world. So, as we know, there are three modes of material nature or the gunas: the sattva, the rajas, and the tamas. Sattva represents harmonious balance between the states of extremes. The states of extremes themselves represent tamas, and the rocking out of from one state to another represents the delta, if you will, of rajas. So, when we are making spiritual progress, the goal is to go from the extremes of nidra alasya pramad tat tamas udayatam, the extremes of indolence, laziness, inertia, which are typically shown by states such as nidra, sleep, alasya, laziness, pramad, madness. And these are some extreme lower states that represents captivation of the senses by the mind, and hence when the mind is captivated by the senses, it is totally suppressing the intellect, the discriminating intellect, which is able to observe and make applied calculations as to whether we are making progression or we are making regression in this spiritual path. So, for suffering to be happening, it can happen in all three states. We can suffer when we are trying to rock ourselves out of the extremes of tamas. We can suffer when we are surrounding ourselves with the desires and passions of rajas, and we are unequivocally suffering when we are in the states of extremes, the nidra alasya pramad of tamas. Now there's a difference though. The yadagre vishme pariname amritopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadya. What feels as poison in the beginning will feel as nectar in the end, and those endeavors are the ones that are levitating you towards sattva. And opposite to this is rajas. What feels as nectarish, sweet, honey in the beginning and feels as wish, poison in the end, that is typically formed by combination of the indriya with indriyartheshu, the senses with the objects of sensual gratification. And that association is rajasic. Now the beauty of sattva and rajas are that in these states the subjects themselves are intelligent and aware respectively in the states of sattva and rajas to perceive their suffering. The third state, the lowest most state of tamas, is very different in this regard. The subject themselves are not aware of the inherent sufferings that they are enduring by their ongoing activities. A good example is animals. Animals are in a state of tamas. Tamas is any state where there is darkness. Darkness represents lack of insight, knowledge, intuition. Sun represents your knowledge, the pure light without any carbon, like the nuclear fusion, which creates just brilliance, the light that is extremely luminescent and free from any carbonaceous particles. So that's the difference between sunlight and your light from a fire on earth that we produce by burning wood, charcoal, burning natural gas, because that is carbon, and carbon will leave behind an ash. So that is why if you have to distinguish, of course, sun is more gudatit, but if you have to say, sun is sattvic and the fire is rajasic. And what is left behind, the rak, the carbonaceous ash, that is tamas. So in tamasic state, people have burned themselves and keep destroying themselves. They continue the progression of self-destruction relentlessly without inner awareness. So when you are in this status quo mode of autopilot self-destruction because of their unhindered pleasure-seeking activities, aka animals, you are in the state of tamas and you have no awareness that you are suffering. The state in which there is awareness and there is suffering, that creates dukkha, sorrow. That is the state of rajas. And when you have overcome the passions and fire and the lust, anger, greed, the states of rajas, then you have come into sattva. You have created balance. And this is the state in which there might be perception of suffering, but the suffering per se has gone down. The sense of suffering has gone down because you know there is a good, big goal that you are going to attain in the process of suffering. Like states of meditation, extremely painful, undesirable in the beginning. But the more we meditate, the deeper we go in dhyana, the more we do the triyog of yagya, the more we do the nishkam karma of yagya dan tap, the more we do the triyog of dhyan yog, nishkam karma and bhakti yog, the better off we become. It becomes a self-propelling activity. Just like someone that he has hit, an object that has hit escape velocity, 11.2 kilometers per second, if you propel something, it will leave earth. Same way, once you're in the sattvic path, you are destined to the higher lokas. And eventually you become lokatit, or you transcend the 7 lokas. So it's an upward trajectory. And it is highly steeped in the mode of intelligence, buddhi. Because you have to have Saraswati, you have to have Buddha to be exercising sattva. And that is the confusion is being shred by jnana. That is what Gita tells us. So you have to use the sword of jnana to dispel your confusions. And that will only come when you have harbored sentience, high levels of self-awareness and observation. And what is intelligence? Intelligence is the ability to apply your observations impartially, in neutral mode, to know what is going to propel dharma. And when you are not able to do that because of identity, when you have made observations but you're not able to apply the right decisions to a set of conditions, that is the state of rajas. Now go one step lower. You have no ability to make observations. Forget the ability to make informed decisions. That is the state of tamas. That is the state of heightened indriyas. That is the state of animals, and that is the state of addicted beings, an addict. Because they are on the path of self-destruction, and there are only 2 reasons to be in the state of tamas for a jiva, embodied soul. One is to burn its past karmas. It had some inherent latent desires in his last life. Yemem yapi sparan bhav tyajante kalevram tam tame vaiti konte sadbhav bharita. It had some latent desires at the time of death that it wanted to attain, and so it was sent to that lower yoni to attain those desires. Most of the times it's lust. Most of the times it's craving for food. And those states people will go in the lower yonis to fulfill their desires, because the animal body is best built to enjoy the senses, not the human body. The human body is best built to attain self-discipline, to attain self-observation, to attain nirvana. That is why you have an erect vertical spine. All the animals have a to the ground horizontal spine. The to the ground, what we call close to the earth, is what is attaching them to all the senses, especially the sense of smell. That is why you'll see the heightened sense of smell. Of the five senses, the first to emerge is dhvani, sound, and the last to emerge is smell. So ghrhan, the ability to smell, is extremely powerful, whether they are dogs, bears, all the animals. They have extreme powerful sense of smell. Why was human being built with a low sense of smell through evolution? Why have we lost the sense of smell? Because that is an impediment to overcoming sensual gratification. That is an impediment to attaining spiritual freedom. So that is why the tamasic states are states of heightened ignorance. So suffering per se is happening in all the three states, because jam mrityu jara vyadhi dukdoshanu darshanam, these are the some states, jam mrityu jara and vyadhi, birth, death, old age and disease. This is a cardinal of growth. This is cardinal of life. This is something that will happen to everybody, rich or poor, higher animal or a lower animal. So that we have to endure. But whether we endure in the state of tamas, rajas or sattva, that is dependent upon us. So suffering everybody has to undergo, but how you intake your suffering will determine the amount of suffering you have. The amount of suffering that is perceived is highest in the state of rajas. The amount of suffering that is perceived less than rajas is the state of sattva, because you have a good, bigger goal that you are going to attain. So that lowers, dampens your suffering. And there is no suffering in tamas. Now, for the subject, there is no suffering in the state of tamas. For the observers, all of us outside it, we can see that the individual is suffering. We can see that an addict who is using cocaine and who is using fentanyl, they are suffering. They will die from overdose, but that is their life. That is their autopilot state. Do not interrupt my fix, my junk. That is their state of mind. Because the indriyas or the senses have hijacked the mind. So the indriyas are the slaves, mind is the master. When the slaves hold hostage to the master, that is the state of an addict, that is the state of animals. That is the state of tamas. You are suffering constantly, you will die because of your ongoing endeavors, but you will keep doing them. And that is why the tamas has to be broken, not by sattva. It is broken by rajas. The rocky rajas, sudden transformation, rapid change, metamorphosis, that is rajas. And that is why you need a sudden shock. Like when your person has had a ventricular tachycardia or some kind of arrhythmia, sudden heart attack, you shock them out of it. So you need a sudden shock. You need a sudden strong amplitude stimulus to change the status quo. It can be death of a loved one. It can be some major life-changing event. And that will shock you out of it, because small doses of sattva are not good enough to create growth. The growth in sattva is from incremental accretion, whereas in rajas, it's from rapid transformation. One big blow, you change your life. Slow growth over time, that's sattva. So my friends, suffering is inherent to all the jivas. Jam, mrityu, jara, vyadhi are the four modalities of suffering: birth, death, disease and old age. But the suffering itself may or may not be felt by the observer. The people who are in the states of tamas, they will not feel the suffering. They think they are enjoying, but they are enormously suffering, and they are causing detriment to their spiritual growth. The people in rajas are a stage better than tamas, because in rajas there is awareness, and hence you are still purchasing, you are still pursuing the sakam karma, and you are constantly being born as a human being again and again because of the chances that the Paramatman is giving you to improve your status quo. But the person in Rajas is suffering and is aware of the suffering. But because the attachment for desires, pursuing the passions is so strong that they continue to chase the sakam karma, and that's why they are always getting pain in the end. And in the last stage is of sattva, in which you have abdicated your desires, or you're in the path of abdication of your desires. So you have less desires and you have less suffering, and you have a bigger goal to attain. You have a bigger fish to fry, which is nirvana, which is moksha, which is helping your beings around you, your friends, families, community, society, country. And that big goal keeps you on track, and despite of the suffering you're enjoying. And that is a state of buddha, or heightened sentience. So in tamas, there is just darkness and ignorance, hence you're not aware of your suffering. In rajas, you have sakam karma, and you have the desires and passions that are creating your suffering, but you have enough awareness to recognize that you are suffering, but you still continue that. And in sattva, you have reduced your passions and desires, and you have a long-term manipura goal, a goal of ambition, some motivation, some intention, some purpose, which is fueling you to work in a certain direction, and that helps to abate your suffering. But you are suffering in sattva as well. Because you have a lot of intelligence, you can overcome that suffering and continue to move in your higher path. And this suffering will happen to all of us, but how we perceive it and whether we are capable to recognize it, as it is the case with rajas and sattva, that determines how we will undo the suffering. Because once you have killed the ego, you have killed the suffering, and over time you will attain nirvana or moksha. Jai Shri Ram.